A budget, when it's done right, does not lead to the can word. It leads to the can word, C-A-N. If a budget is done properly, you can do things that otherwise you would not be able to. Now, in putting together a budget, talking about those things, you need to understand where you got to where you are now. There are several things you need to do. You need to take a look at what you have, okay? Those things of value in your possession right now, be it money in the bank, stocks and bonds, land, buildings, whatever it may be. Those are called assets. And then secondly, you look at what you owe. Okay, do you have a mortgage? Have you borrowed a personal note at the bank that you got to pay back? Those are called your liabilities. Those two groups of categories wind up on a financial report called a balance sheet that we'll talk about in a little bit. When I start talking about balance sheets and those things, most people's eyes glaze over. You don't have to worry about putting together a balance sheet and doing all the number crunching to come up with it. That's not really your job or your responsibility. But I do think it's important that you understand what a balance sheet is and how to read a balance sheet. The other important financial document that you need to know about, need to have in your church, is called an income and expense statement. Your income, obviously, is the money you receive. In your church, it's your tithes and offerings. Okay? And then your expenses, obviously, is how much and who you pay. Those two categories wind up on your income and expense statement. In a for-profit business, it would be called a profit and loss statement. In the church, we call it, and in the nonprofit world, it's called an income and expense statement. I like to quote Zig Ziglar. Most of you probably are familiar with Zig, great Christian man who has been a motivational speaker most of his life. Zig says, money is not everything, but it's reasonably close to oxygen. I think Zig's got a point there. You can't do anything without money, okay? Money is important in our own personal daily lives, and it's certainly important in church. You cannot carry out ministry without money. Budgets are simply a tool to help you manage how you deal with money. Okay? It's an excellent planning tool. And that's why I think that budgets are so important, is because it helps you to look into the future and say, okay, here's where we are now. Where do we want to be 12 months from now, 2 years from now, 5 years down the road? Working with a budget and looking at what my resources are likely to be and where I'm going to spend those resources is an excellent planning tool. And it also ties your ministry goals and your action plans to your needed resources. If you want to start a daycare center, what is it going to require in terms of financial resources? What I found in many churches is you have the financial planning going over here. Okay, we're going to, this is what we expect to receive in the coming year in tithes and offerings, and this is where we expect to spend a lot of it. And then separate from that, they do their ministry planning, and the two never meet. Doing a budget, I think, is a good way to tie ministry objectives with the resources it's going to take to achieve those objectives. Next, a budget helps that your ministry does not overextend itself, that you avoid overextension. All right, how do we go about putting together a budget? Well, first thing you should do is start with mission and vision. You should measure everything you do by your mission and vision. Now, these two words have become so overused, they're almost trite today. But they, in my view, are extremely important. What is the mission of your church, by the way? Anybody here? Tell me what your...
Win souls and make disciples.
Win souls and make disciples. Can kind of summarize, that's a summary, if you will, of the Great Commission, isn't it? Great Commission? I would offer to you today the proposition that the Great Commission is not your church's mission. Why would I say that?
Too broad.
Sir?
It's too broad.
Too broad, okay. You want to elaborate on why it would be too broad?
So the local churches in one specific area, and you have to deal with where you are.
Very good, yes.
I think that our budget reveals what's most important to us. And
Well-
what we stick our money in is what we really are doing.
Where we spend our time, where we spend our resources, tells everybody where our priorities are, what's important to us. Somebody else over here has a comment question. Yes? The reason that I said that that's really not the mission of your local church is exactly what Rob alluded to in his comment. It's the fact that that Great Commission is the commission of the church, the global church. But your local congregation cannot be everywhere and do everything at the same time. It's just physically impossible to do that. Yes, we are to preach the gospel, win lost souls, disciple people, and teach them how to be ambassadors for Christ in this lost and dying world. But that mission, that our Great Commission, I should say, needs to be translated in what does that mean for my local congregation, for my local church on the street corner where we sit, in the community that we are surrounded with, and with the neighbors that we have. What has God called us to do in this specific community? Yes, we support missions, and we do help send missionaries around the world, and we're involved in that kind of evangelism and outreach. But what has God called us to do in this local community? And then secondly, vision is really a mental picture of what you see the church being down the road in the future. It's like the Lord takes you up to a mountaintop and says, you see that city over there? Way over there? That's where I want you to go. That's what I want you to be down the road. Now what he typically does is he doesn't show us, he doesn't like the whole path, does he? Just a couple of steps at a time. Otherwise we'd run off and leave him most likely. But in my view, your mission is the Great Commission translated into what that means in my local community, in my local geographic area, with the conditions that I'm surrounded with. And then my vision is, where is God wanting to take us? What are we going to look like down the road as a church and as a ministry in this community? So you start with those two things. If you don't know, there's an old saying that says, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So if you're not doing some planning and looking ahead and deciding where it is the Lord wants to take you, you can wind up just about anywhere. So that's where you need to start. Secondly, establish a budget team. Put together some people who can help you, that can help bear the load. Some of the people that are leaders in your church. You know who some of the highly respected members are that other people look to and respect and will listen to. Also those who may have some expertise in some certain areas that you want to put on that team. Then you start from zero. A lot of churches, when they have a budget and they redo the budget for the new year, they just simply tweak the old one. I would suggest you start every year from zero and justify every dollar you're going to expend in terms of the ministry for the new year. Okay, first estimate your future receipts. You want to determine how much am I likely to see come into my local church in the coming year. Now, yes, build in some faith into that. That's no problem at all. In fact, you should do that. But you need to use some wisdom in that as well. But before you determine your expenditures, you got to first determine how much it is that you're likely to have to expend. So start there first. Okay? Then plan your spending based on that estimated income. First thing you need to do when you start looking at your spending, look at your fixed costs. Now, what do I mean by fixed costs? Those kinds of things that you have to pay simply to keep the doors open. If you've got a mortgage, that's a gorilla sitting on your shoulders that gets fed every month before anybody else gets fed. So you have to make the mortgage payment. You got to pay the light bill. You got to pay the insurance premiums, as Dennis was talking about a little earlier. You have to keep the lawn mowed. You got to keep the lights on, keep the carpets vacuumed. A lot of those kinds of things are the kinds of things you got to think about. Well, those are what I got to do simply to keep the doors open before we can really do any ministry. And then you look at your specific ministry objectives. Where is it the Lord wants to take us in this next year? And what are the resources it's going to take to get there?